Nothing. They ain't turned around. Okay, thank you, sir. If you're watching online, man, it's great to have you here too. We've been in a series called Jesus Saves. Brad and Salim know. And I mean, it's big. You guys can see that. I know you can. And we have been in it for a long time, a year. And we got 2 more weeks after this week. And then we're going to land the plane, man. I love beginning sermon series and I love ending them. In the middle, sometimes it's like, whoo, we ever going to get finished? But I love it. And I've loved the book of Mark, especially towards the end. It really kicks into high gear. And what we see is many times it's called the Passion narrative or the Passion story. You've probably seen the movie The Passion of the Christ. That's where they got that. Mel didn't come up with that name. I say Mel like he's my friend. I don't know him. But a quick recap to kind of put this into context where we are, because we're intentionally slowing this down, is that just if this were real time, just a few hours ago, they had the sunset and they had the Last Supper. In our time, that was weeks ago that we talked about that. So that's why you got to kind of fold it all back in. Then they walked to the garden to pray. And that was such a great week, not just because I preached it. I just love revisiting that story with Jesus as he prayed and really took it in, asked God, passed the cup. Oh, wow, what wonderful stuff there. The disciples fell asleep. At midnight, the armed guards come and arrest Jesus. So you kind of see the tick-tock here of the clock, not the dance thing. And then Peter denies Christ 3 times. They go to court all night. It's a kangaroo court. Around 5 or 6 a.m., they want a second trial, which that's shady. 5 or 6 a.m., second trial. Nothing good happens at 5 a.m. unless you're running or at the gym or something. The sun comes up. Pilate tells them what? I can't find anything wrong with him. The crowds don't like that, so he's like, okay, we'll go through with it. Between 9 and 12, he's put on the cross. The beatings happen then. The crown of thorns, Salim talked about that last week. Around 3 p.m., we think, Jesus cries out 3 words. What is it? It is finished. Sometimes translated, it is complete. But it is finished is sufficient. 6 p.m., they take Jesus down off the cross and they put him in a tomb. And without getting any sort of confusion, and Mark certainly goes out of his way in his book to say this, Jesus is dead. Jesus is dead. So that's where we pick up. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to read some verses in Mark 15. We're going to talk about it, but really what we're going to do is really slow it down. I know you want to know what happens next. I know you want to go right to the Easter story, but you'll just have to wait till next year. No, next week. Easter in July. That's fine. Easter was in March, so why not in July? Weird months. But here we go. Mark 15, 42 to 47, and then we'll pick up some other verses that are actually in other gospel books, Luke and Matthew today. So you've got this. And when evening had come, since it was the day of preparation, that is, the day before the Sabbath, Joseph of Arimathea, a respected member of the council, was also himself looking for the kingdom of God, took courage and went to Pilate and asked for the body of Jesus. Pilate was surprised to hear that he should have already died, and summoning the centurion, he asked him whether he was already dead. And when he learned from the centurion that he was dead, you see, Mark is like going out of his way here. Like, let there be no debate. He died. He granted the corpse to Joseph. And Joseph bought a linen shroud and taking him down, wrapped him in the linen shroud and laid him in a tomb that had been cut out of the rock. And he rolled a stone against the entrance of the tomb. Mary Magdalene and Mary, the mother of Joseph, saw where he was laid. So that is where we are in the Passion narrative. We've been using the phrase over and over and over for several weeks now. Jesus takes my place. Good. And today we see Jesus is in my tomb. So we know he took my place on the cross. We know he took my accusation. We know he went to the Father. He asked on my behalf. And today we see he's in my tomb. And legitimately, I would love to just go ahead and jump to the part where he comes back out of the tomb. That's the best news we'll ever preach at this church. And we preach it in some form or other every week. Not just Easter. But today I find it very interesting that Jesus is in the tomb. But what I see, from what I can tell, especially the crucifixion part, this didn't all happen in isolation. It wasn't like Jesus was just killed in a vacuum. This was not a private execution at midnight, where only certain people came and could witness it. From what I can tell, and I don't know, hundreds, maybe thousands of people saw it. Some get named. We'll see some names of some of them. Some get called the crowd or the mob or the townspeople or the villagers, as I sometimes call them in my house. I don't know why I think that's funny, but it is. Like, the villagers don't like it. And so what we see is there was a crowd at the cross. That's what I titled today's message, The Crowd at the Cross. Because I sometimes wonder, if I'd been alive then, would I have been there? I mean, a lot of things would have had to happen, right? Geographically, chronologically. But let's just say I was. What would I have been like if I was in that crowd? Would I have felt the way they felt? Would I have done the things they did? I know we all like to look back at historical atrocity and think and believe that we would have done the right thing, don't we? You ever think that about yourself? I'm not going to give any examples, but I think we all at some point have thought, if I was alive then I wouldn't have done that. Yeah, okay, you probably would have. You probably would have. But the thing is, I don't have to be in the crowd at the cross to have a reaction to the cross. I can just be here today. The story is the story. How the crowd took it in, well, how am I taking it in? When you listened to Salim last week describe the cross and know that that's Jesus taking my place, my death, my penalty, how does that make you feel? Maybe not how do you think or what do you know, what are the facts. I mean, how do you feel about that? Because what I know is this: when I read the story or hear the story of the cross or even know that Jesus is laying in a tomb for me, I have to react. I have to respond. So how does this crowd react? Might be a lot like I would react. I think there's a lot of versions of me out there in that crowd. One of them is the first little group I'm going to talk about. And I got maybe, I don't remember, 3, 4. Nobody keep count. I don't care. It's in my notes. I got it. But the two beside him had something to say. You ever notice that? Some of y'all, maybe you didn't grow up at church, you never know. I bet you've heard about the two people on the crosses next to Jesus. We got to flip over to the book of Luke to look at it. You're like, I thought we were doing a sermon series in Mark. Listen, guys, we can do what we want. We can do whatever we want, okay? I made no promises, except I'm going to preach the word. So here we go. Luke 23, it says this: 2 others. So you got Jesus and 2 others. And what are they described as? Criminals. They were led away to be put to death with him. Luke on down in 23:39 says, one of the criminals who were hanged railed at him. Do you know what that means? They mocked him, they insulted, and they railed against him, saying things like this: are you not the Christ? Save yourself and us. They started insulting Jesus. That's quite a crowd. I find that curious. You ever just wonder, you probably know that story. You've probably heard great illustrations about that. Alistair Begg has one. It's awesome. Look it up later. But it's what are they doing that for? Why are they acting like that? Is it because they're ticked off at this whole thing? Is it because they're being murdered? Well, they're not being murdered. They're being executed, right? They're thieves. They're not psycho killers. Why are they acting like this? Could it be that these criminals, since we're in this sort of what is the crowd like? How am I like that? Could it be that they are in pain? Do you guys think they're in pain? And they're cursing God a little bit here? I mean, listen to what they kind of say. They basically say this: if you really are who you say you are, make this pain stop. You ever think about that? You say, well, how do you know that? How do you know they were thinking that? Well, I think about it like this: if you're dying, why bother expending energy insulting an innocent man who is dying with you unless you think he can do something about it? Have you ever been in pain? You guys ever been in a state of pain? Maybe not physical, maybe it was emotional. You get some conflict in your life and you wonder, why is this not going away? When you're in pain, have you ever noticed nothing could make you madder than the idea that there's a God that won't make this pain stop? Could it be that's what these guys are thinking? What I want you to see, and what I have actually been through some pieces like this in my life, is that every one of us, I believe at one moment or another, have raged against God. I mean raged. And maybe it was in a moment of pain where you said something like this. I kind of wrote it out. God, if you really are who you say you are, then why don't you fix this? Maybe it's because you're not real. Now, I would never ask for a show of hands, but have you ever thought that? Now, we know famously one of them figured it out. One of them unlocked the lock. He came around, and it's in there, and it's important because I think it shows us what repentance looks like even in this moment. And we see that described for us in verse 39 of Luke 23. You have to go down a little bit. It says, but the other rebuked him. Now, I don't know about you, but this is strange to me. You got three people dying on a cross. One is insulting, the other kind of starts out, but then finally he comes around and he starts rebuking the other guy on the cross. He says, do you not fear God, since you are under the same sentence of condemnation? And we indeed justly, for we are receiving the due reward of our deeds, but this man has done nothing wrong. And I got to tell you, that is some level-headed thinking when you're being crucified. Like, he's figuring it out. I think he knows my time is short and I figured out what is going on here. And you know this, Jesus, he says, Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom. And what did Jesus say back? I say to you, today you will be with me where? In paradise. What is going on here? Here's what he's saying. We did it. We deserve to be here. He didn't. He doesn't deserve to be here. He didn't do anything, and yet he's dying for me. Thief on the cross figured it out. Did you know the accuser loves to say, you did it? You ever been accused? You ever been told, you did it? Well, guess what? There will come a day. 1 John talks about it. You can look at it later. 1 John, I think it's end of 1 or 2. I don't remember exactly where. Probably should have looked it up. Did not. It's in there, though. It talks about there will come a time you will stand before God and you will have to say something like this. Did you do it? Are you guilty? And guess what your answer has to be? I did it. I did it. And the accuser is going to say, Mark, you did it. Mark, you sinned. Mark, you rebelled. You shook your fist at God. Maybe not literally, but you did it. Now, because of Jesus dying on the cross for me, he will then stand up. Think of it as like a courtroom. The judge is looking at me. I did it. I plead guilty. I totally did it. I deserve hell. I deserve the punishment. I deserve that death. I did it. Jesus will then stand up. This is how I see it in my head. You'll read it later. Maybe you don't see it like this, but the facts are the same. Jesus will say to the judge, to God, he'll say, listen, Mark here, he did do it. Now some of you are like, what kind of lawyer is this? Dude, we talked about this. This is the part where you get me off. No. He's going to say, Mark did it. Mark did it. He 100% did it. He's 100% guilty. He deserves hell. He deserves death. He deserves the tomb. But guess what? I paid it. He did it. I paid it. The thief on the cross gets that. In a moment of pain, he gets that. You're in the crowd around the cross. Do you get it? When you look at the cross, or you heard Salim explain it last week, do you think to yourself, I did it. I deserve that death. But he paid my penalty. He's my advocate. He will not lie to God, but he'll tell him the truth. He did it, but I paid it. So he's with us. This is the confession of every person, the thief, of every person who finds repentance and faith. We deserve it. He didn't. Now, I'm not saying this, and I want to be very clear. I'm not saying that you have to conclude that every moment of pain in your life is a direct response to something you've done. I don't believe that. I don't think that because of my pain, it must be something I've done. No, it is because of something we've done. It's sin. And sometimes if we're being real honest with each other, can't we just say the reason that I'm in pain is because I did something I shouldn't have done? Like, you know me, I'll level with you. Like, oh man, why do these terrible things keep happening to me? Because you keep making terrible decisions. Like, oh, why do cars keep hitting me? Because you're standing in the street. You know, so you want to just kind of level with people sometime? Like, sign up for 10 minutes of counseling with me, and that's what it is, all right? Like, high compassion level. Like, I don't know, don't stand in front of cars. You won't get hit by them. Seems pretty obvious. But sometimes it is because of this. We're in a world filled with pain, and we live in a world that is rightfully condemned because of our sin. That's the thing we found pretty easy to be united around. We're good at being united around sin. You ever notice that? And the only one who truly deserved to feel no pain was Jesus, who voluntarily entered it for us for no other reason other than he loved you. He didn't have to do it. You say, but I'm in pain now. Maybe not like those two. Maybe I'm not hanging on a cross. I get that. But I'm in pain and I'm in suffering. What should I do? Be one thing if I just told you stories. What am I supposed to do? I see a couple ways you can approach that. One, you can conclude that your pain means Jesus really is not who he says he is because of the existence of pain in your life. And so you can say, Jesus must not really be God. That is one area you could go. Or you could look to the cross and say, wow, he really does care for me. He took my pain. He's dying for me. You can have this understanding that God didn't simply send Jesus to just give you some perspective on your pain. Listen, I love perspective on my pain and suffering, but sometimes I need like answers. Don't just give me perspective. Well, God didn't just come down and say, hey guys, here's why you hurt. No, he said, hey guys, I'm going to send my son to die for you and take your pain. And that means that I may not always understand why I'm experiencing this pain, but I also need to understand who God is and who I am. And big shocker inbound here, I am not an infinitely knowledgeable God. So I don't always ever understand everything all the time. But I do understand that Jesus took my pain. And he took my suffering and he took my death. The cross shows me what my pain can't mean. And that God does care. And he hasn't lost control. So that's the first crowd. The second one is pretty much everything. All of creation. You say, well, that's not really a crowd. No, I get that. Just work with me. You know, I get to write them, so whatever. But all of creation reacts to the cross. All of it. That's what this is about today. This crowd, these people, these things that are around the cross, when it happens, when he says it is finished, like, what happens? Reaction. When God does a huge thing, do you react or do you argue about it? Look at Matthew 27. It says, now from the 6th hour, there was darkness over all the land until the 9th hour. And behold, the curtain of the temple was torn in what? 2. And where did the tear start? Let's see if you're listening last week. And it's on the screen. Okay. It was torn in 2 from top to bottom. And then what happened? The earth shook and the rocks were split. And if this was a children's sermon, I would have everybody stand up and shake like they're in an earthquake. But I ain't going to do that to you. You guys are too dignified for that. But I do know this. What I am saying is part of the crowd at the cross was all of creation. And even it was responding to what was going on. The world was responding. It was reacting in such a way. It says the earth shook. Is it too far a step to call that an earthquake? You ever been part of an earthquake? Anybody ever been in an earthquake? I've been in a couple. Most recently, I was down in New Jersey. I was at a class. I know Brad was there because he was sitting next to me. And I think Rob Shealy was with me. And we were sitting, this guy was teaching. We were in these like chairs, tables, you know, like classes are. And we're sitting there and I was diligently taking notes. And I noticed that the chair started moving. Then the table was doing this. And I literally was like, hey, I think this table's moving. I think this table's moving. And then in my mind, because you always justify things, you're like, oh, I think that's that train going by. And then I got to thinking, like, there's no train out there. Why in my mind did I see a train? New Jersey Transit. It must be going right through the parking lot. Like, I have been outside. There's no train, you know. And so this thing's shaking. I'm looking at Brad. I'm looking at Rob. I'm like, I don't know, man. And I'm like, are we about to, like, die in this place in New Jersey? And I'm like, I don't know. And I'm like, so we're like, hey, I think it's an earthquake. And the guy up front never felt it. We responded. You're standing on ice. You ever stood on ice? You start to feel it crack a little bit. Do you act like it's not? We'll be fine. All of creation was not able to stand the weight of what was going on. The earth shook. The rocks split. Somebody say, what's this got to do with the crowd of the cross? You don't have to say the whole thing, but I know you're thinking it. Here's what I'm saying. What this is saying to me is that when Jesus said it is finished, when Jesus was crucified, when Jesus took my place, it demands to be noticed. Demands it. Otherwise, you're faking it. You're acting like it didn't happen. You have to respond. You have to react. You have to do something. You cannot see what Jesus is doing here at the cross, and honestly, I would say in the world today, and you can't grapple with that thing and say, you know what, I'm going to act like it's not there. Well, that is a response. I believe you must see it and say, is this true? Did God really do this? Did God create me and die for me so that I could be with him for eternity? I'll tell you what, that's good news. That makes me quake a little bit. And can I just speak to my Jesus following friends that go to this church and maybe online, you just away? It is really impossible, I believe, to experience I'm talking about my saved folks here, okay? It is impossible to experience the glory of God and think it's boring. All right? The Bible, the story of God, the gospel is a lot of things. Boring isn't one of them. And this is not my plea to get you to stand on chairs and raise your hands during worship, because I get it. Sometimes it's quiet, but you better react. You better react to what he's doing in your life. Every once in a while, it's okay to smile. It's okay to say amen. I like call and response. I like that, so long as it goes along with what we're doing. You know what I'm saying? You're always yelling on the downbeat to be heard. I question you. This action from Jesus, though, it demands a response from the crowd. I have to respond. I can't get around it. Look at this, man. You're going to love this. Verse 52, Matthew 27. It said the tombs. Y'all ever seen a graveyard? Of course you have. You know the mausoleums that are up on top? Let's think about that for a second. You got that in your head? All right, I'm about to ruin that for you. Many bodies of the saints who had fallen asleep were raised. What? Even the dead folks responded. My goodness, there's hope. There's hope. There's hope. It was so earth-shattering that the dead people couldn't even contain themselves. They jumped out of the grave and they started dancing. You say it doesn't say dancing. I know they danced. I know they danced. So I think maybe, if I'm part of creation and God is doing something great in my life, I should react a little bit. I don't want to fight it. Get this, those on the outside, this is another part of the crowd, those on the outside, they figured it all out. Not the insiders. Took them a while. It says in Matthew 15, this says it in Mark 2, but I'm just trying to give you a different perspective. When the centurion who stood facing him saw that in this way he breathed his last, talking about Jesus, he said, truly this man was the Son of God. Now here's why I go to this, because I love the movie that they made with John Wayne as the centurion. You ever seen that? And he steps forward and the camera goes in on his face and he says, he was indeed the Son of God. I'm like, John Wayne gets one line and he John Wayne's it. Even John Wayne figured it out. Quick question though. Why is it only the people on the outside that get it immediately? You know, we don't have a verse prior to the end of these Gospels where the disciples are like, oh, wait, I get it. There's no verse of them in the courtroom in the back going, of course we don't want Barabbas. There's none of that. We don't ever see the chief priest, who all they did was study prophecy, say, this just connected for me. What we do see is the Roman soldier all of a sudden gets it. And he gets a verse in the Bible. He's like as outside on this as you can get. He didn't walk with Jesus for 3 years. He didn't study ways of Jesus. He's just like, he's the Son of God. How did he know that? Here's what I think. If Jesus takes my place and this is the gospel, then the only way it can be understood, you ready for this? The only way it can be understood isn't through knowledge, isn't through just all of a sudden getting it, it's through humility. I don't think those guys were humble enough yet. I think they were too filled with pride. They couldn't compute what was going on. But I know for me, and I'm not going to have you guys raise your hand, but I know for me that I start to get it when I humble myself and recognize who I am in front of Jesus. And I'll say this, I've never seen a proud, arrogant person lean in on grace. Have you? No. They normally have to be weakened first. Have you guys, I will make you raise your hand on this. Have you ever been humbled? Yeah. Isn't it fun? Isn't it great? Don't you wish you just learned that lesson? You either be humble or be humbled. Or at least what someone has to do is they have to recognize their sin, which is very humbling. I've found that the longer I'm a believer, the more I realize my sin was much bigger than I thought it was. And the closer I come to the cross. So how do you become aware of that? How did this centurion, this soldier, how did he become aware of it? Listen, here's what I think. I think he looked up. I think he looked up and saw Jesus. If I'm always looking down at people, it's going to be very difficult to look up to see Jesus. I'll never see what's above me if I don't look up. So if I'm super into myself all the time, and then I'm going to have a lot of trouble seeing what God is doing in my life because I'm only looking in or down at others. So warning, if you're super into yourself, you're really powerful, you're rich or wealthy, you know, super religious, or you're part of the in crowd, or just be careful. Because you might have some humility inbound that you need. But if you can do it, if you can maybe look up every once in a while, you'll see who Jesus is. And then you must have a reaction. Another person in the crowd, he actually gets named. It's the one who helped carry the cross. He gives us a glimpse of the future. I find this really interesting that in Mark 15 it says, and they compelled a passerby, Simon of Cyrene, who was coming in from the country, the father of Alexander and Rufus, to carry his cross. Like, why so much information in the middle of this story? I mean, this is a terrible event to be at. But if you had to be there, this is the part you'd want. I think this is a picture of what the church is supposed to do. We're going to willingly pick up Jesus' cross, and we're going to help him carry it. That's the picture we got. You see, it's true in one sense. Jesus did say it is finished. But not everyone has heard that. Like, you know that, right? Does anybody have any friends that are not believers? Of course you do. How are they going to hear about it? Well, you're going to pick up the cross and take it to them. You're going to show them. You're going to preach it, teach it, speak it, show it, but it's not up to you, but it's up to you, okay? You're going to see that in a couple weeks of the Great Commission. Like, it's not my job to make sure my neighborhood is all Christians, but it is my job, I was told, to stay and tell people about it. So how might I do that? How might I carry the cross? Because it's one thing to just kind of understand, like, oh yeah, he carried the cross, and I get how that all went. I get that, but like, how am I supposed to do that? Well, some people may say this, like, well, you can leave your home and you can go around the world and you can spread the gospel to people who've never heard it. Yes, you can. That is something you absolutely can do. But here's what you definitely can do. You can definitely tell the people that are already in your sphere of influence about Jesus. You know that, right? You can do that. You can start right where you live. Hey, do you work with people? You say, well, we're not allowed to really talk about that at work. No, I get that. I don't work in a place like that. We're freely allowed. We're very allowed. It'd be weird if you're sharing the gospel with people. Like, Brad, do you ever remember a time in your life when you accepted Jesus? Like, you better say yes. You better say yes. You can do more than you think you can do. About your school, you're a student. Are you sharing Jesus at school? Your neighbors, you got neighbors. You go to the gym, you work out with somebody. What do they know about you? If we brought them up here, would they say, oh, yeah, that's Mark. He's a Christian. How do you know? Well, he wears a Jesus Save shirt a lot, That's a big flag telling them. You may have to embrace a little bit of discomfort. And I know we don't like discomfort. And I know sometimes I'll have people tell me, man, it's not going well. We're having some discomfort. This path is really hard. I'm not sure this ministry is working out. I'm thinking about trying something else. And my first question is always, well, is it just not working because it's not comfortable? Or is it not working because, we need to re-strategize? And I do get it. But then sometimes I think about Jesus and I'm like, do I think that this was Jesus's dream ministry? Like, Jesus had 12 guys follow him around for 3 years that never understood what he was talking about. Do you think that was Jesus' fault? Was he just not communicating it clearly? Jesus had to go to a cross and die. Do you think that was uncomfortable? I bet it was. I'm thinking yes. Better question is, what I'm doing, is it actually taking the gospel to people? If it's yes, then keep that up. You pick up the cross and carry it when you do something. You say, well, just give us some examples. Okay, how about this? When you forgive someone and they actually know why you're able to forgive them, that is taking the gospel. How are you able to forgive me? Because Jesus forgave me. When you're able to give grace to someone, especially when they didn't see it coming, how are you able to give me grace? Because Jesus gave me grace. When you're able to let go of a grudge, a beef with someone, and you tell them, hey, here's how I was able to do that. Jesus didn't hold a grudge against me. These things that you're saying, God gave me grace so that I can experience it and give it away. That's why I'm here. Am I willing to pick that up and carry it? Here's what I want to do at the end. I want to pray through some of those crowds. Because I think in this crowd, there's probably some people that are in those crowds. I know there was for me when I first came through this. So I really want to spend some time praying with my church. First thing is this, is maybe some of you why don't we just close our eyes? Let's just close. It makes it a little bit easier. I was distracted. Some of you may say, yeah, I'm in a lot of pain right now. And you're really struggling with that. So see, this part of the sermon is you've heard the word, and now, like, I got to eat. I got to feed on the word. Now you get to. God gets to work on you now, if you'll let him. And so you say, well, I'm in a lot of pain right now. Do you have something that you just can't figure it out? Maybe if you're being honest, it's your fault. What am I supposed to do with it? It won't go away. I would invite you to look at the cross and have a moment of realization and reaction that he really does care. He took your pain. He died for you. Are you quaking? Are you in that crowd? Are you part of the creation that's quaking? But the reality is, this is more than just raising your hands and worship, guys. Maybe there's some things going on in your life, and God is doing those things in your life, and the ground is quaking around you, but you're acting like it isn't. You feel it, but you're ignoring it. How does my life, ask yourself, how does my life react to what Jesus did for me? Does it compel me to tell? Does it compel me to talk about him? Maybe you're the cross carrier. You've been carrying a cross. You've been doing a ministry for years. For years. And you know he called your name and you're doing the right thing. But you know what I've been finding as I get a little bit older and talk to people a little bit younger? Is that some people get called into ministry and they ignore it. Now, every believer is called into ministry. Some of us are called to get to do things like I get to do. And I keep meeting people that were called younger and ignored it. So maybe today's the day. Jesus is looking you in the eye. And he's saying, you're going to plant a church. You're going to be a pastor at a church. You're going to be a children's director at a church. You're going to be a word. And you've just been kind of acting like maybe he was looking at somebody else. There's something God has put on your heart. Maybe it isn't to work at a church, but it's something that is going to be difficult, and God has given it to you to carry. I heard somebody say this week, or maybe I read it, it said, I've heard that I want to do great things for God, and instead they adjusted it to, I want to do things for a great God. And in that, I think what happens is sometimes we misjudge who God is because we're waiting for like the next wave, the big wave. I'm waiting for that big wave. And what God is really wanting you to do is do things for him because he's great. Are you on outsider? And today this all made sense. Maybe it was like when the veil was torn. Some of you've been standing in front of that torn veil for years. But you're not entering in. The veil's torn. You believe Jesus is who he says he is, but for whatever reason, you're not walking in. Can I just tell you, today's the day to be obedient. and to walk in. We had a baptism in our first service. You know what? Some of you need to be baptized. You need to take that step of obedience. You say, why is that such a big deal here? It is a big deal here because Jesus got baptized. He took a step of obedience. Jesus, the perfect Jesus. Some of you need to walk in and give your life to Jesus and say, I give everything to you. If that's you, I want to show you how to do it. You can pray with me right now. The prayer is a prayer. It's words. But the Bible says if I confess with my mouth and believe in my heart that Jesus saved me, he will. And so you pray this with me right now. You say, Dear Jesus, I know I am a sinner. I believe that you came in humility for me. I believe you died on the cross. I believe you were buried in the tomb. I believe you rose again. Forgive me. From this day forward, I will follow you. Thank you for saving me. Thank you for being my Lord. Thank you for forgiving me. Amen. Listen, if you just prayed that, we'd love to know. You can text KMV Life to 55498. You'll get a quick text back. Helps us help you. We'd love to know. If you want to get baptized, you see me today. We can do it at the end of this service if you want. We got t-shirts. We can give you something. You can come back for the third service. We can pretty much do it anytime. Don't let another minute go by without responding and reacting to what Jesus is doing in your life. Amen.